And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Bethany Schmidtt. Bethany is a Nashville recording artist and songwriter with nearly 14 years of secular performing experience and 27 years total in music. She had a near-death experience after being in acute respiratory distress, and today we're going to learn about it. Bethany, thank you so much for being my guest today, and welcome.
My pleasure.
All right, if you don't mind, let's start on the day it happened and go from there.
Okay, so I'll back up just a couple days. My son, I was getting ready for his first birthday, and we had both had the flu the week before, and he got over it fairly quickly. And I was just still not feeling good. And so, but I'm doing the mom thing and I'm pushing through because I have to plan a first birthday party. So that was on a Saturday. And then Sunday night, we had to go play at a church event in another city. So we did that. And while I was there, when we got done, I took my temperature because I brought my medicine and my thermometer because I was just not feeling good. And my temperature was 105.
Wow.
And I was just like, I have to get home. So got home, got into bed. And the next morning when I woke up, I was incredibly dizzy, weak. I got my son up. Again, he's only a year old. And I kind of try to get him his breakfast and lay down on the couch. And then next thing I remember, I woke up. I realized I had passed out. And so I called my husband. He came home, took me to the ER, and we lived in a very, very, very small town with a tiny little hospital. So we went to that hospital and they did an x-ray. My blood pressure was like 69 over 31. And my oxygen level was really low. So they immediately thought I had pneumonia, and they did an x-ray, and he just came in and he said, "You need to be in ICU. We can't treat you here." So they called an ambulance and took me to another nearby hospital, which was kind of a mid-level hospital. It wasn't not very big, but definitely more prepared than the tiny little hospital I was at. And so I got taken there by ambulance. And when I got there, they immediately put me in ICU, started breathing treatments. That I don't remember. I'm going to tell you basically what I was told happened, because that's all I remember. The last thing I remember is getting to the second hospital. And so I was given breathing treatments, and over the next 2 days, I began to decline. And over these 2 days, I had been working at a pediatric office, and the doctors I worked for was the pediatrician on call at that hospital. And she was telling my family, "You need to get her to a different hospital because otherwise she's going to die here. She needs a higher level of care." So on the morning of the third day that I was in that hospital, my husband had planned on going in and asking them to transfer me. But when he arrived, he was told by the pulmonologist in the ICU that I had coded and that I had been put on life support, and there was already a helicopter on the way to pick me up to take me to a different hospital in a bigger city, which was Asheville, North Carolina, Mission Memorial there. And so when they did that, evidently they said that I was a difficult intubation when I'd stopped breathing, when everything had started to shut down. They said there was question as to whether there was a ventilator in the ICU. They just weren't prepared. So I was gone for about 10 minutes there. They finally got me back, intubated me, was breathing for me. I got put on the ambulance or on the helicopter. And again, I had coded multiple times on the way to the hospital in Nashville. And when I arrived there, they put me in the neurotrauma ICU because I had been without oxygen for so long. They were sure I would have neurological damage. So I spent 12 days in the neurotrauma ICU there. And they basically just tried to keep me alive long enough for me to fight off whatever I had. It acted like pneumonia. They said it acted like a staph infection, but they even had infectious disease specialists come in, the CDC. They just still to this day don't know what I had, but it was causing abscesses all in my lungs. And I still don't have an answer as to what it was. So eventually, they called my family in. My brother-in-law came in from Montana. My family came up from Florida because they kind of thought that was it, and so I gradually did get better though. And it took a while. They would try to wean me off and it wouldn't work. And they'd have to put me back in the coma. So this went, one step forward, two back for about 2 weeks. Excuse me. And then finally they were able to wean me off of it. And I spent another month in the hospital because I did have neurological damage. I couldn't talk. I was having hallucinations. I couldn't remember why I was there. Couldn't remember what year it was. I had a lot of damage in my throat, and that was probably from the intubation, the feeding tube. I had an NG tube also, just all that. And yes, so I spent another month in the hospital and then an additional 2 weeks. But that's everything I was told. But from my experience, what happened was the last thing I remember was the ICU doors opening of the second hospital. And I remember parts of them giving me a first breathing treatment. And then that's it. I don't remember anything else until I woke up in about 2.5 weeks later in the hospital in Nashville. So the last thing I remember, I'm having trouble breathing, so I just closed my eyes. And then when I open my eyes again, I look down and it looks like I'm standing on nothing. And I realized where I was. I just kind of had a knowing that I was not in my body anymore and that I was somewhere else. And being a believer, I believed I was in heaven. And I can remember being afraid to take a step because when I looked down, it looked like I was standing on nothing. But just as I had that thought, a light hit it and I could see it was just this almost like an iridescent gold coating over it. And I realized, okay, I can walk. So I took a step and then I looked up and I just saw people walking by. I saw a city in front of me. It's interesting because I think as a Christian, I had a preconceived notion about what heaven would look like, and it looked nothing like I thought it would. it it's very, very hard to explain. There's all these sounds, and the way I describe it is that I knew it was like choirs of angels, but they're all singing a different song, but it's somehow all coming together to form one song. It's the strangest thing, but it was beautiful. I had an awareness of what had happened. I had an awareness that I still had family at home, and that I had a son and 2 daughters and a husband. But my thought process in the moment was just peace. And I didn't have any, I don't know what the word is. There was no longing. There was no desire to be with them, because in my mind, I knew there was no time, so they would be there with me soon. That's how it felt to me. It was like, oh, they'll be here soon, so why would I miss them? Like, it just no care, no worry, no nothing. It was interesting. So I'm just wanted to check things out, and I see people walking by, and I didn't know where I was going. And I can remember looking at a woman, and she actually kind of looked like my aunt, but my aunt hadn't passed away or anything. She just reminded me of her. And I went to speak, but before I went to speak, I heard her in my head say, "This way," but she didn't speak. So there was no talking. It was just knowing between people. And so I started to walk that way. And I mean, I was just looking around. I mean, I guess I was taking it all in. And the colors were more colorful, and it's the air itself I don't know how to explain it. The air itself almost had a color. If you've ever seen, when the sun shines through a window and you get little bits that kind of sparkle, bits of dust that sparkle, the air looked like that, all of it. And so I started to follow her, and I heard water running. And then I remembered the scripture that said there is a river flowing from the throne room of God, or the throne of God. And I was like, aha, like things just started clicking. And I remember things that I had read from the Bible, or that I had learned when I was younger. And they weren't necessarily outright things I saw necessarily, but even the ground I was standing on, I can remember the Bible says streets of gold. Well, I expected gold, but it wasn't gold like I expected. It looked different. It felt different. So it was just kind of overwhelming. And I remember I kept walking. And as I did, it felt like, the way I describe it is like that I had a rope around my waist, and that someone yanked a cord, and everything, it disappeared from my view, and everything went black. And things were black for a while. I just kind of sat in dark and silence. And then my eyes began to focus, and I look around, and it's really dim, and I'm in this dark place that reminded me of like a burnt out cathedral. And I was standing on a staircase, And if I'm looking forward, it was kind of off to my left. And the staircase went into the cathedral and kept going down. And so I sat down on the steps because it was so different from where I just came from. And I was just suddenly overcome with this feeling of separation from anything good. There was no light. There was just a sense of anxiety and dread, and it was terrifying, really. So I sat, and I was too scared to even move. So I'm sitting there and I'm like, I don't understand where I'm at. I'm just confused. And I start to hear a voice behind me, and I didn't see who was talking to me. But it started accusing me and saying, this is where you belong. And then it started reminding me of, everything bad I had ever done. And I've lived a lot in 45 years. I just had my 45th birthday, and I was a teenage mother. I've been divorced. I've been in an abusive relationship. I mean, I've lived a lot in those 45 years. And I used to abuse alcohol, drugs. So I came out of that, but he started from the beginning or whatever, and just started listing off all these things I had done and telling me this is where I belonged. I didn't deserve any of that where I was before. And it went on and on and on. And finally I got up and I just ran down the stairs. Well, as I walked down the stairs, it spiraled down. And I decided to follow it because I was mainly just trying to get away from this, whatever it was that was talking to me. So I started going down the staircase. And as I get down the staircase, I'm in an underground hall. And it looks like kind of like the pictures I've seen of like the caves in Paris, the underground tunnels, things like that. But I noticed there were cells carved into the wall, the actual earth. And inside these cells were these, I don't know how to explain it. They had human features, but also animal features, beast features. They were like these just monsters. I mean, it sounds childlike, but it's really the only way I know how to describe it. I've never seen anything like it in a movie or anything. But they also didn't talk. But I began to see and hear visions of what they wanted to do to me. And it was the most terrifying pictures. There's no horror movie. There's nothing that can describe what they were conveying to me. And for a few minutes or however long it was, I don't know, I was just frozen in fear. Finally, I ran out and sat back on this staircase, and I was just sobbing. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where I was. I didn't understand what was happening. And the voice came back and started it all over again. And I got to the point where I just couldn't take it anymore. And I don't remember. I mean, I started having memories of my grandmother was a very spiritual, she was kind of like the spiritual leader of our family. And she was the one who used to take me to church and believed in me and prayed for me when I was, just acting a fool when I was younger. And I just remembered a song she used to sing, and a song we sang in church. And I don't know why I didn't think of it before then, but it said, call on the name of Jesus. So I just cried out the name Jesus. And just like that, I heard a voice say, I'm here. And just like I was pulled by a rope, this time it felt like I was just lifted up underneath my arms and pulled out of there. And I woke up and I was in the hospital. And at that point, I wasn't, I guess, able to breathe on my own or whatever. So they put me back under. And when they did that, that whole scene started over again. And every time I would become conscious and they would put me back under, that would happen again. And after the first few times, I realized that, and from my beliefs, I believe it was a demon, Satan, trying to get me to just give up my will to live. My mom was a nurse for 30 years, and I can remember her telling me, and she worked with elderly, with terminally ill patients. And she said, the will to live is everything. If they give up, it's only a matter of time. And I knew what it was trying to do was get me to just give up my will to live, because at that point, I felt like it was the only thing keeping me alive, or hanging on, at least my body. So this would happen again and again and again. And finally, the last time I woke up was when I was completely off the ventilator and all the medication had worn off, the medication to keep me in a coma. And so that was the end of that part. But I still, again, I couldn't eat, I couldn't swallow, I couldn't talk, couldn't walk. And they were running every test, doing MRIs, swallow studies. I was seeing neurologists, and, I'd have a specialist come in, and they just thought it had to be brain damage from the lack of oxygen. So they told my husband that I was probably going to need to be transferred after I was stable enough to a rehab facility for 3 to 6 months. And so they started having, while they're getting my health back, my oxygen level was still low. So they're trying to get me well enough where I can move to a rehab facility. I'm still seeing physical therapists, speech therapists. I wasn't able to stand yet, but they're coming in, trying to get me to sit up, get in the chair, all these different things. And my husband, at this point, they moved me out of ICU and down to a step down unit. And he was finally able to stay with me, because he had been, as you know, you can't stay with the patient in ICU. So he would sleep in our van in the parking lot, and come in and sit with me in the ICU until he had to leave again. But now he was able to be in the room with me, and he said mentally I was gone. I knew who he was, but the voice had told me that I had been in a car accident, and that my son was dead, and that I was paralyzed, and that he had left me. So a lot of times people have Icu dementia, which is basically when you're in a coma, your brain doesn't doesn't get any exercise, you begin to hallucinate. So that was happening. It was a mess. And every night he would, I was pulling tubes out. They had this vest that strapped me down to the bed because I would try to get up and I couldn't walk. So I was a fall risk. And yeah, they were just praying that, I would gradually get better. And then one night, we were probably about 3 weeks in to the therapy and trying to get me back to a baseline. And my husband had been reading the Bible to me because I couldn't read or write. He'd been reading the Bible to me, and he said he looked at me and I looked different. And he said, and his question to me to know where I was at mentally would always be, do you know why you're here? Like in the hospital. And my normal answer would be, yeah, I was in a car accident. I wasn't. So he said, he looked at me and I looked different. He said, babe, do you know why you're here? And I said, yeah, I got the flu and got pneumonia. And he was like, what? And I said, yeah, I got the flu. I got pneumonia. I got septic. And, and like he started freaking out a little bit, and he called the nurse and everything. Well, what I didn't know was at that time, they were having a church service, and a friend of mine had gone into church, and before they even started service, she went up to the front and she's like, I want to stand in for Bethany. She's like, and I want to pray for her healing. And so my entire church gathered around her and laid hands on her, and they prayed for me. And in that moment, my brain was healed. And from that moment until I walked out the door on my own was 3 days later. Whereas, 72 hours before, I couldn't even stand, I couldn't speak, I couldn't write, I couldn't do anything. So that's what happened.
Well, that was an amazing story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
No problem.
When you kept being put back into that unconscious state,
Mm-hmm.
and you have to relive that stairwell incident over and over again, did you keep calling out to Jesus again and he would pull you out, or you would just, when you became conscious, you were out of it?
No, that the last time that I called out for Jesus was the last time it happened. So it never happened again after that. This was all leading up to that moment where I was being worn down. Every time I would go, it was just wearing on me until I got to the point where I couldn't take it anymore. And that's when I called out to him, and it never happened again after that.
Do you feel like those experiences are just as real as life here right now?
100%. I actually suffered some pretty serious PTSD from the things I saw. Yeah. I mean, it was real enough that it affected me physically. As you can imagine, I had trouble sleeping because I didn't want to go under, that fear of going under and seeing that again was so much. And I still suffer with insomnia. That PTSD is not as bad now, but I still do. But yeah, I would have, panic attacks if I thought about it. So it was very, very real.
You appear to have recovered well from it.
I have short-term memory loss, which is fun for my husband. But other than that, I do still have a little bit of damage in my throat. Fortunately, they said I would never sing again, and that didn't happen. So it did not affect my singing. It affected, I guess, the muscles here. So sometimes when I get tired, I'll slur my speech a little bit. But other than that, I do have a more trouble swallowing than I did before. I have to be careful and just make sure I chew well, have a drink, but other than that, and the short-term memory loss, I do feel like, like I said, I still suffer with the insomnia. I think maybe my internal clock got broken. I don't really get sleepy, or it could just be the anxiety about sleep. But other than that, it's relatively normal. I did develop the infection caused me to have some autoimmune issues. So I do have RA, but I control it with how I eat and things like that. So, but I mean, as opposed to what could have happened, I'm definitely way better. And it did take a while. I didn't get back, to 100 right away. It took a few years, but the mental part was what we were most worried about.
When you say RA, do you mean rheumatoid arthritis?
Yes. And that's an autoimmune disorder. And fibromyalgia, which comes along with that, same thing. The infection, anytime you have an infection or a trauma, it can trigger an autoimmune disorder. So yeah, but I'm doing pretty well.
How do you think you've changed now spiritually and personality wise from this experience?
I think God definitely became more real to me. I think as Christians, we can tend to have this idea that God is somehow so far away, and that, I am one person, and who am I? But I believe that the God I serve is big enough that he is interested in every single one of his children. I think they're all important to him. Just like I have 3 kids, there's not one that's, less important. So I see God. I think I have a better idea of his identity as Father, rather than just some deity, just as Creator. It's a much more personal thing now. And I also think that one thing I found interesting was that I did not, this is hard to put. My husband saw me suffering until I expired, but I didn't feel any of that. It's almost like I was taken out of consciousness, until, so that I was spared some of that suffering. So it also put the question into my mind is, is that what also happens to other people who die? That maybe sometimes we see these tragic things and these horrific things, and maybe that's how it appears, but maybe that's not really what's going on spiritually. So that gave me some more questions. And I think I'm also just much more, the veil between here and there is a lot thinner. I think we don't realize how close it is, and not close as in death close, but as in the spiritual world. So yeah, I think those are a few things that occurred to me.
When you were there and you saw the woman that you communicated with telepathically, when you looked at her, did she look like people, or did she look like a ghost version or an energy version of people?
No, everyone looked human. It was honestly like any other community, I guess, like any other city, except like I didn't see buildings. There was a wall, but it was also iridescent, and so it didn't look like a, I don't know how to explain it. It looked like an entrance, basically, like a walled entrance. Like I've seen pictures of Egypt, things like that, and it just looked like a natural wall, with just community people just passing by, walking by, going to and from, and no one looked old. I do remember that. Everyone kind of looked the same age, but no, they looked just like people.
Did you happen to glance down at your own body and see that you could still see your hands and feet?
Well, I did. When I first opened my eyes, I saw my feet. So, and I looked the same. So
before you went to the stairwell area, did you happen to have the thought, well, okay, this is heaven's pretty cool, I wonder what hell is like?
I didn't. No, I didn't. I was so content where I was. And I can remember being mad when I got pulled away. I was like, no. I want to go back there. I was angry. And no, I didn't. I would have, like I said, I had fleeting thoughts of, my family, I'm in heaven, my family's, not dead.
Right.
But there was no desire to be anywhere but there.
Yeah, I found that fascinating that you said that, well, they'll be here pretty soon. So
yeah, it was just like,
because of no time.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting.
That's also comforting too. Like if you've lost somebody, that if you think that's where they are, then they're okay. You'll be there for them soon.
Do you think that this changed you at all professionally as a singer?
Physically or spiritually?
Spiritually. Like when you sing, do you think about it, or?
Like I said, I feel like the veil's a lot thinner. I feel like, and people say that when they hear from God, it's not usually, I mean, some people, I guess, have encounters with God where they audibly hear God, but I don't audibly hear God, but I realize the way we communicate with him here is no different than the way we communicate with people there. It's all that knowing and hearing doesn't have to be audible. You hear it in your spirit, you hear it in your mind, so I definitely think the chasm between how I worshiped before has gotten thinner because I feel like he's closer. I feel like I hear him better. I feel like I feel his heart for his people better.
Have you noticed that you have any abilities that you didn't have before? Like now you're more empathetic, or you can kind of see the future, or anything else, especially due to the veil being thinner?
Yeah, I do feel like I am much more empathetic. I feel like I can feel his heart for people when I talk to them. I definitely feel like, and in my beliefs, we're all given the ability to see and hear and hear from God and know certain things. There's a gift of knowledge. There's a gift of prophecy. And I do feel like those gifts that he's placed in myself are definitely more easily accessed, if that makes sense. I definitely feel like those gifts are stronger, for sure.
Do you feel like you have any negative after effects from this besides the physical pain and, some of the PTSD stuff?
No, I mean, if I had to go through it again, I would. It was hard on my family. I had 2 teenage daughters at the time. It was very hard on them. And you know, they've had to deal with that. That caused them trauma as well, seeing their mother like that. And for a while, my son had a lot of separation anxiety because he basically lived with our friends for 2 months at a year old. But so I would hate to have to do it again, only because of them. But if I had to, I would. I feel like only good came out of it.
That's great.
And I feel like hopefully there's something in what happened to me that can help somebody else. And I've heard different things. So whether it's hearing that I didn't suffer, or hearing that there's something else after this, no matter what it is, that it would help somebody.
Do you feel like heaven is here? It's just like a dimensional change, like as if you're changing the station on a radio.
Absolutely. I absolutely do. I feel like it's so thin. And you know, the Bible talks about how we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against spirits. And these things going on around us, I think, are closer. Closer is the only way I know how to say it. It's going on as we're living our lives. So it's, I do believe it. You know, I don't understand the physics of it or any of that, but I do feel like it's a blink of an eye away.
I think one of the things that you may be saying, and which is good to know, is that maybe your loved ones who have passed, they didn't really suffer in their transition. They just kind of moved from one transition to another. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely how it was for me, even though, like I said, my husband witnessed it. He saw me suffering. He said, you know, I'm gasping for every breath and have, you know, just days of that. So I definitely feel like it may be there for me. It was definitely different. It was a completely different, spiritually, what was happening was completely different than what it looked like. I never felt a moment of pain or struggle at all.
Yeah, I think that's true for a lot of experiencers, and even most of my guests that had something traumatic like being hit by a car or a bus or something like that, they seem to describe being out of their body even before the impact happened.
Exactly. That's the way it felt, and must have been because that was on the first day. And I technically, you know, didn't die until 3 days later on the third day. So, yeah, I don't know, you know, what happened, but I know I didn't suffer.
Do you feel like the woman who you communicated with was like possibly a guardian angel or someone that you knew on the other side? Or do you have any idea about that?
I've thought about it because she did look like my aunt. And I thought maybe because like I said, everyone looked the same age. So maybe it was a relative that I just never met. Because she did look like my family, you know, my aunt. So I have my guesses that might be what it is, that it was a relative. I also knew who was there. So my husband's grandfather, and all I can describe it is just like I said, it's a knowing. It's just like you have knowledge. No one said anything. No one did anything. You just know. So I knew, you know, my grandmother was there. I knew my husband's grandfather was there. And I didn't see them, but I knew. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just kind of had a knowing of that there were people there that I loved. and people there that my husband loved.
Do you think it's possible that your heaven experience was the NDE, and then you getting pulled into the stairwell incident was like you got pulled out of heaven and kind of pulled out of your NDE, and that whole incident repeating over and over were more hallucinations due to the intubation and the medication?
Right. I definitely think that's what happened, because if I line my experiences up with what happened, that's definitely what happened. It was when I was in a coma under a chemical sedation. That's when that was happening. So I was very much alive. I was being artificially kept alive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think at that point, I don't understand all the mysteries of God. I don't know how vulnerable we are in those places where we're not really here, but we're not really there either, but I do think it was definitely when I was in the coma that those things kept happening. Because again, I kept waking up and then it would happen again. And so I knew where I was. And I had even at one point begged, I tried to convey to my parents and my husband, don't let them put me back under, because it kept happening. I was crying. Like, all they could really see was that I was crying, and I was trying to tell them, don't, I couldn't communicate it effectively, but that's what I was inside telling them not to do. Of course they had to. I mean, it wasn't, it's
Right.
what they had to do to treat me, but yeah.
Yeah, because I feel more like you were in heaven and then you got pulled out into kind of like the black void, which is kind of like when people first pop out of their body, kind of like a consciousness separated from their body, but not really going anywhere. And then I don't feel like you went to hell or demons.
No.
I just felt like all of a sudden you started going into these hallucination things.
Right. And I don't feel like I was actually there either, because in heaven, I could feel everything. Like I could feel, I don't know, I could just feel everything. I could smell, I could hear. And there it was, all my senses were kind of dulled down. Couldn't smell really. And I knew the things there couldn't hurt me. So I felt like if I was, actually there, I would have had a different experience than I had in heaven. It was definitely, there was definitely a difference of feeling. One was definitely more, what's the word I'm looking for? The other place was kind of more surreal. And then heaven was definitely more, things were more tangible there. I'll just like that way.
If you could give advice to anybody who had lost somebody, how would you tell them that their loved ones are okay on the other side?
I would just say that I know, first of all, that I didn't feel my own suffering. It was a very fast transition, and that where I was, there was nothing that I needed. There was nothing that I wanted. I was perfectly content, perfectly at peace. And I know for me, I lost my brother 3 years ago. And to know, I think it just helps with accepting that, and I believe I'll see him again. And so I know that he's not even waiting on me, because, again, I think we see time so linear, and I think the afterlife is bigger than that. I think God is bigger than that. And I think it's much more simple, but also much more complicated than we understand. I think we overcomplicate the simple things and simplify the really, really complicated, big stuff. I would just, if it's anything like my experience, there's absolutely nothing to worry about. And a very close friend of mine lost her daughter, her 5-year-old, and you know, I know it gives her a lot of peace also. So I think faith plays a big part in that. I mean, I think you have to, some people will see this and say that never happened. Or some people say these types of things and saying, well, it was this firing and that firing, and that's fine. I mean, but when you experience it for yourself, there's no doubt in your mind. And I know there's no doubt in my mind that I was at peace and that the people I love were at peace also.
All right, I'm going to switch gears on you, and I just want to promote you. You have a YouTube channel. What is your YouTube channel called?
I do. It's called Bethany Schmidtt Aesthetics. And if you search my name, Bethany Schmidtt, on YouTube, you'll find it. I'm a makeup artist. Mm-hmm. That's my day job. So
that's great. And you're also on Instagram and Facebook, right?
That's right. It's also Bethany Schmidtt Aesthetics. And also for anything related to this stuff, my direct messages are always open, and I always welcome anybody to message me if they have any questions.
Oh, great. Is there anything else that you're working on that you would like us to, share with everybody?
Not at the moment. Hopefully we'll be making some new music soon. And if you follow me on my social medias, you'll be notified of when that happens.
Do you ever put musical performances on your social media?
I used to. I haven't. We were the worship pastors at a church, and we had a live stream every Sunday. So, but we're moving on to something a little different now. So that's definitely something my husband and I are going to start doing, though, is putting up some music.
All right, Bethany, well, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
From my experience, there is a God, and we're all his children. And I feel like sometimes we feel like we're waiting on God, when in reality, he's waiting on us. He's always, always closer than you think he is. And I think people make a relationship with God really, really complicated. And in reality, it's, the Bible says Jesus is a friend that sticks closer than a brother. And I had a little brother who stuck close to me growing up, and he's your friend. And I feel like, again, sometimes we see him as so far away. But really, he's a conversation away. And I just want people to know that, because I think everything else follows. Everything starts with a conversation. And so I think if we just start a conversation, then the relationship can grow. And I love talking to people about this, because, again, I think we complicate things. And I think it's a lot simpler than we make it out to be.
Well, Bethany, thank you for that message. And thank you so much again for being my guest today. I really appreciate you, and I wish you the best.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed it.
Me too. All right. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.